Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for being here today. Today we're grateful enough to speak with Mathilda Zeller, the author of The Bee King, better image there, The Bee King. And just really hats off to you with this. This was one of those stories where personally, I don't read this genre that often. But I got so sucked into it. I loved the family aspect, the harrowing aspect, the world building that you've done, because it was a story where, yes, it was fantasy, but a lot of it felt based in reality. I think a lot of us can really, oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of us can really identify with that trope of kind of the big guy and the little guy and the David versus Goliath kind of story. And it was just one of those stories that, while identifiable, made the world building just that much better. So really great job with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun to write.
Was
My first, sorry, on you go, Ryan, if you want.
No, I was just gonna ask, was kind of the direction the story took, was that always your intention? Was it always meant to be horror? Was it always, or have that horror element to it?
Yes. Yeah, it was. I love horror and
Okay.
always have. So yeah, and also I mean if you come into something with a horrific premise, it's kind of hard to not make it horror, I guess.
When Ryan was talking about the book being something different, the thing that stood out to me about it the most is that if you take it on its basic premise, where a woman is taken away, or a young woman is taken away against her will almost, or traded to some kind of royalty, or like fae, for instance, or such, there's a lot of books in the mainstream just now like that. And I loved that this just took the absolute opposite approach to the whole thing. So, the romance and stuff was not what you would find in like a Sarah J. Maas book or something. I thought, oh, this is brilliant. And then it kept subverting those expectations, those tropes that you'd almost expect from the genre. It kept turning them on their head. I also wanted to tell you that I wrote down the words Honey-Gothic at one point.
Honey-Gothic. I
Ooh.
love it.
If no one
I like
said
that.
that yet, I'd like to put a stamp on it.
Yeah. Oh, I really, really appreciate that. When you brought that up about the romance, absolutely. When I think I was like maybe 20. I was barely an adult when Twilight was when I read it. And it was just such a unsettling experience for me to read that because my life experiences. I was reading that book and I was like, this is really weird because this is like his behavior is giving me a huge amount of anxiety. This feels like it should be horror or thriller, but it's
Yeah.
clear that the author intended it to be a romance. I had the hardest time wrapping my head around that.
That's perhaps why it appealed so much to me. I was never much of a fan of Twilight, of course, but I really love the completely opposing direction it took. So was that deliberate as well from the outset? Did you set out to kind of, or I guess how much of it was trying to invert those tropes and how much was wanting to put your own kind of stamp on it?
Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of time, I mean, for me, I usually get an idea for a story that I get really excited about, and then I write it, and then I realize how it is um using tropes or turning tropes around or doing whatever. And then when I go back in the editorial process and I recognize that, that's when we play with that a little bit more. Um, but yeah, no, it actually just was its own thing to begin with, you know.
Yeah, I
Uh
like that. Did the bees
yeah,
come first?
what yes.
Oh,
And I mean, go ahead.
no, I was just that was news to me. That was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, not to be like you know, casually horrifying or whatever, but okay, so when I was 12, I lived on the border of Texas and Mexico. I lived in a city called Laredo, which is like not the greatest place to spend middle school. And my closest friend one day told me that like basically her aunt was like trafficking her across the border on the weekends. And I told my mom, who was, besides being my mom, she's a teacher at my school and a mandatory reporter, and she did everything she was supposed to. You know, she called the police, she called Child Protective Services, and when everything was said and done, absolutely nothing happened. And like, you know, just like coming to that realization that the adults can't, in my mom's in my mom's case can't, and in everybody else's case won't necessarily protect you, you know, was something that was, yeah, I thought a lot about that. And you know, and when there's a whole like system in society of adults that will protect and uphold abusive people, which of course isn't unique to Laredo, to her family and the people around her, but to, you know, to kids all over the place. I just I was thinking about that. And also I did a lot of beekeeping as a teenager. So
That was going to be another question, and written in bold letters. How much bee research went into this? There's a lot of similar to how those thematics seem like they were there from the ground up. They're so ingrained into the structure of everything in the story. So does the bee stuff. There's like, oh, there's a lot of bee stuff in here, like even like background bee stuff going on with the structures of the
Your mic is bad.
Is my mic really bad today?
Yeah. You sounded like a robot for the past 15 seconds.
I'll go and get another mic and we can cut that out. But Mathilda, tell us about the research.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, bees are awesome. I had happened to have already had a fair amount of background knowledge on them because, you know, I did beekeeping as a teenager, and actually, you know, about 2016 to 2020, I had hives as well. And, you know, again, particularly as a teenager, the society and social structure of bees just felt both simultaneously horrifying and also really like comforting. There's just like so much clarity and structure, but it's also a fairly ruthless and violent thing. It was always just a little bit unsettling, you know, when you work all summer to make sure that the bees are living and thriving and doing great. And then one day you show up in the fall when it starts getting cold, and there's just this pile of dead drones outside the hive. You know, they've been done away with and discarded because there's no more use for them.
It's a difficult, because we have bees at the house as well, and it's a difficult kind of acceptance of that. Like, yeah, that's just they're no longer needed, so they're gone. And I think there's a lot to be said about that metaphorically as well. But I just want to go back to the point that you made a little bit earlier about just how adults might not be the saviors. And I think that that played in really well with how you wrote the story as well, because especially towards the ending. And yeah, there's spoilers in these interviews. So if you make it 10 minutes in, go back and read the book. But like how you ended the story and everything as well, like they really did take matters into their own hands. And you made it clear from the get-go that the adults in the room were not the safe space in any capacity. Like you had, oh gosh, I'm like Sylvester B. I forget his name. Um I
Oh yeah, the bee can.
yeah, and there were moments where I felt like that was a safe character, but at the end of the day, it was, you know, everyone has their agenda, everyone has their goal. And it was interesting to see how that played out, because at the end of the day, you can really only trust your close friends or your family. But even then, that played up because who was her friends? Who was her family? So I just thought that that was all really, really unique. And it had me on my toes. Like I didn't suspect the ending in the slightest. So
Oh, thank you. That's very rewarding to hear. But yeah, no, it was a lot of fun to write. And I mean, also with outlining, I get a general idea of where things are going, but a lot of times about halfway in is when there's specific twists, or you think of another way that it can tie together in a more satisfying way. And I really appreciated one of those like writing advice things that I appreciate the most is when Neil Gaiman said that like editing or revising is making it look like you knew what you were doing the whole time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I mean that tends to very much be the case where in the last half or the last third of the book, I'm like, oh my gosh, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And I'm constantly leaving notes for myself to go back and make this make sense with the beginning of the book. It's also why, beta readers are so incredibly crucial because
Oh, yeah.
you want to see if you were able to pull off that lie that you knew what you were doing from the beginning.
It's kind of like doing a magic trick for the first time. Like, did you
Yeah,
buy
yeah,
it? Was it convincing?
yeah. Did you see the thing or did you not see the thing?
Yeah. Oh no, I vibe with that quite heavily. It's good to know that everyone else does that in the editorial process as well. I'm sure there's superstars out there who pull off plot twists on their first draft, but oh goodness no, I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
Speaking of, well, not so much plot twists, we'll get into that later, but given how rich the setting was, there was a detail in it that interested me. I wondered if it was deliberate that he set it in kind of almost approaching like the 1920s, or like a kind of a version of the 1920s, like a kind of parallel to it. And if so, why that particular time frame?
Because you've got this, this complete boom in economic prosperity, and this, kind of, this culture of youth and wealth and partying, and this idea of, I mean, I feel like when people are in that, are in that place, a lot of times they can feel immortal or invincible, like everything is so good that it could never go wrong. And we're just too strong and wealthy and powerful for that to happen. Which is also, the most ideal, setting for all kinds of lurid and untoward things.
Well, I mean, it very much felt that way. Like when she was having dinner and meeting the family and everything, the fact that what she was actually doing was kept a secret from her, but everyone else was just partying and enjoying and celebrating. And I think it's that kind of mentality that is frankly becoming more and more prevalent today with like there's people in the know, like there's the people in charge and then everybody else. And it's interesting to see this perspective of how that plays out behind the scenes. Cause I like that's part of the world building for me is I don't really know how far-fetched that is from reality, like that felt pretty natural.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, in general, in the real world, in real life, all of us are a product and a commodity. We're using the social media for free, and we're using our phones and all of these things, and not only using them, but benefiting off of them and becoming dependent on them. And in every case, we are just giving away huge amounts of information, right? And our use, us using it is actually us being used quite a lot more, even in terms of targeted advertising and things like that. So yeah, no, yeah, humans are really good at using each other and playing horrible games, right? And of course, there's so much fear about TikTok and the Chinese having your information, but the only difference between that and this is which country is using it. So,
It's like you said, at the end of the day, everyone's got an agenda, and unfortunately, we're the center of it. Like,
yeah.
but when it came to the actual world building with Oxenby and going out to the it's called the Aviary.
Apiary.
Apiary.
Apiary, apologies. Was that kind of a setting you always had in your mind? How did you get inspired by that? How did you create that?
I mean, I personally love like Gothic fiction, and going out to these strange and isolated settings with really dark secrets and all of that. I like just the atmosphere of all of that is a lot of fun. And of course with Oxenby, I mean, having lived in, I mean, a lot of places, but among the many, many places I have lived, I have definitely lived in a few, small insular towns. And also, I mean, Laredo's a somewhat larger city, but just places where there's like social systems that uphold horrible things and protect the wrong people.
It's just accepting the status quo because it helps whoever's already in charge. Like that whole idea of why would the people in charge make any like the people who have the power to change things, why would they if it's already in their benefit?
Yeah, yeah. And if you do try to push against it or pull it down or even, say, verbally define what it is out loud, you're the bad and wrong and crazy one, and you're just making problems, and you're, humans are such social creatures, and like, from birth we depend on other people for survival, and I think it's very deeply ingrained, and we're hardwired to need other people and to want acceptance and approval from other people, and when that need comes into conflict with other, profound primordial human needs like safety and protection and trust, it's a terrible place to be. So
I think the horror in the book was twofold, and that was part of the reasons that I loved it so much, was because you had the obvious bee-related kind of body horror type thing going on, but then there was also, anytime I read a story where the cycles of history, or the fact that it's almost our human nature that damns us to repeat these cycles, whenever I read anything that uses that as a kind of structure or makes reference to it, I get filled with this kind of almost, it's like cosmic horror, I guess, like existential horror. We're like, oh God, there's nothing we can do to fix this. We're all stuck in the belly of this machine.
yeah,
And,
exactly.
yeah, the machine bleeding to death with us inside it. So I wanted to ask about, I know you're a huge horror fan. I think it's really obvious that you're a huge horror fan. What's your kind of like your favorite horror, the horrors that have influenced what you like? Give us some of your kind of favorite.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, they're probably not shelved as horror in, in the bookstore, but when I was, 11, 12, which I think is probably too young, my parents made me read 1984.
Oh God.
My parents were, I don't want to use the word spies, but they were spying on the USSR for the United
Well,
States.
hold on. There's a story here. There's a story here. That sounds like another book.
Yeah. So they met at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And I was born in Germany because my dad was spending every day sitting in a radio tower intercepting Soviet radio signals and writing them down and translating them for the United States government.
Wow.
and and when he was home at night, our bedtime stories were always horror, like a perennial figure with skeleton man who would like climb into the house through the windows and be horrifying. And of course it was always dad coming out with the baseball bat to dismember him, but skeleton man's bones always found each other again, no matter what. He would always regenerate.
That's fantastic.
So, but yeah, no, they made me read 1984, probably in part for political reasons and their own experiences with the Soviet Union and whatever. Um, and The Time Machine, which I think is probably technically science fiction, but these different races of people and the underground people and all of that. The Omega Man was also a kind of big part of my formative years, this post-apocalyptic world with these vampire people. And of course, more recently, I'm just completely in love with Sylvia Moreno Garcia and Grady Hendrix. And, I recently, not to like sound like a commercial, but like I recently did a story in Never Whistle at Night, but it's an anthology, and the writers in there are also just really incredible.
I like the cover.
Thank you. Yeah, I love it too. It's just like so beautiful and vibrant, and and I mean on that side of things as well, Indigenous horror. My grandfather's an Alaska Native, and I lived with him in third grade and again for my ninth grade year. And he's also a huge storyteller, and Inupiat folklore is also deeply horrifying. It's awful, how like every culture and civilization has like its sun and moon myth, right? Like the moon's in love with the sun and the sun's in love with the moon, they're chasing each other, but in Inupiat mythology, it's a story of a girl who's getting like violated every night, and she's trying to find out who's doing it. So she puts soot and ashes all over her hands, and she slaps the back of the person. And then later she raises this lantern and she finds her handprints on her brother's back. And she's just so horrified because that's her brother, and he wakes up and he chases her across the sky, and she's carrying this light and he's pursuing her, and that's the sun and the moon, and then again you're stuck in that horrible cosmic cycle from which there's no escape because you're being chased forever. So
that was a roller coaster from start to finish.
that's a long story. But yeah, no,
we have a running kind of tally for like every time that we have a guest on. I feel like we find out something incredible about them, about their story or some cool trivia or something. But my parents were spies who made up the Skeleton Man. Has to be, that's high up there, man. That's fantastic. That's incredible. That might be my favorite.
Speaking of all the storytelling in your life, was it always like as a kid, did you always grow up being, I wanted to be a writer, I want to be a writer? Or is this something you kind of fell into as you got older?
No, I definitely wanted to be a writer as a kid. Always, since I was old enough to read. And they made me read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe. A lot of
You don't say.
Wow.
So you made me think about when I was like, that was one of those things. Reading him made me want to be a writer. So
I guess with all of this writing influence in your life, the Bee King very much reads as a standalone. Is there more to come from this world? And you mentioned working or being a part of an anthology. What else are you working on at the moment?
I'm currently, I just started revisions on a novel. I signed with literary agents last November. I do still intend on doing indie projects on occasion in the future. What that ratio is going to be, I have no idea. But they just gave me their editorial notes on my most recent book, that I'm not supposed to talk about yet for other reasons. But I'm really excited about it. It is also horror. It's very dark. It takes place in northern Alaska in the 80s. My mother grew up. So I was going
Does it involve radio signals, interpretation, translation, anything like that, radio towers? Like,
No, it's a bit more, it's a bit closer to home, I guess. I was very nervous about writing it because I was, mostly going off of my mother and her 7 siblings, all of the things that they talked about their childhoods and growing up, because I was never in Alaska in the 1980s. But they read it. My mom and my uncle were 2 of my primary readers and feedback givers, and my mother told me that it was so accurate, it was uncanny and a little bit triggering. So.
That's high
That's
praise.
how you know. Yeah.
Bullseye. Yeah, that's good work. I'm really excited to read that. I won't push it. I don't want you to break an NDA or anything. It's not my fault. But that sounds really cool. I'll be excited to read that when it comes out.
A big, what do you call it? A big segue here. We're running out of time. We got about 7 minutes left, and I really wanted to ask about, because obviously the story is called The Bee King. I wanted to ask about the Bee Queen though. What was it like writing her and just essentially like godifying a bee? How did that feel?
It was a lot of fun. And it was fairly cathartic, Um, oh, so I have 6 children, right? And having them, especially as babies, is probably it is simultaneously one of the most vulnerable and empowering things in the world. Like, I mean, it feels so incredibly vulnerable because like you are locked down. Like this is your life now, right? Is this other person's life, and 24/7 they need you, right? My mom comes to visit, my husband's here, but he's also working, or but at the same time, I think one of the most like surprising, like unsettling, but also, I don't know, intuitive things that happened was realizing, like holding my like newborn firstborn and realizing how easily I could like kill for her.
Yep.
And she was born the weekend before finals on my second to last semester of college. And I took her to like some of my last finals when she was a couple of days old, and then I was pushing her home in my stroller to our apartment, and these 3 dogs came up, and I had no idea where they came from, but there were 3, and one came up on one side of the stroller and the other came up on the other side, and the other walked in front of us, and I was just like, pushing the stroller and thinking about how I'm going to shove my fist down that dog's throat and pull out its stomach if it like tries to get any nearer to my child, right? Like,
Oh, she can see the 2 different reactions on the cameras of Ryan, like clutching his chest and leaning in, more interested. This is the most metal.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, as someone who has no children and feels very far away from that, like I feel like I could understand it 100%. I'm not there yet.
Okay.
But yeah, like it shows you how, I guess it shows you like how strong you really are. Because when push comes to shove, you will shove.
Yeah. And I mean, it surprised me, but at the same time it didn't, because it just made a huge amount of sense. And there's a lot of things that make sense to a postpartum brain that don't always make sense in other contexts.
It might have surprised you. It definitely surprised the dogs.
But yeah, no, that was kind of, like, but also that, that prospect of, she, in the case of the Bee King and the Bee Queen's dynamic, right? Before she, was doing whatever as some kind of primordial, eldritch thing out in the wild, and then she was like stuck underground and turned into this commodity for the functioning and comfort and wealth of other people. And I think a lot of times That's something that motherhood is made into, you know, and a lot of times inappropriately. That's stuck underground forever, just creating, you know, without, yeah. So yeah, that's something I thought about.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's real, like without the appreciation or this or that, because you're the one that's making everything happen behind the scenes, but then you have the bee king that's sitting there basking and collecting the perks of it.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, if you take kind of the more like negative aspects of how patriarchy impacts motherhood, that is something that I kind of, you know, and just pull it to its natural conclusion is that bee queen, bee king dynamic. But at the end of the day, the bee queen made everything. And
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like that power to create and the power to destroy are very closely intertwined. You know.
Yeah, they eat one another's tails all the time as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, and her primary concern is like that this is her hive and the well-being of, you know, of course, her what tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of children.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it's not the people, it's not the honey, it's not any of the money and everything that's coming out of it. It's, it's my babies. So
it makes total sense, and I'm glad that we got to touch on that because we've got about a minute left, and I want to make sure that people who like this story, what's the best way they can get a hold of you? What's the best way they can follow with what you're working on?
that's a really good question. I have been fairly scarce on social media, but I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter.
Mhm.
The Bee King's on Amazon, exclusively, I think. Eventually I was planning on taking it wide, but I haven't. And I'm not sure when I'll have time to. Um, but yeah, so
Well, thank you again so much. This was such a nice time, and again, The Bee King was such a great book. We're so glad that we got to include it. It felt like a breath of fresh air in genres I don't normally get to listen to or read.
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
We're so
Yeah, same. Thanks for coming along.
But in case you made it 40 minutes into an interview, the story was The Bee King by Mathilda Zeller. Take care, guys. Thank you all again.
All right, see
Bye,
ya.
guys.